Welcome to this explainer. We're jumping right into a fascinating psychological and historical puzzle. How exactly did the most powerful man in the world orchestrate his own disastrous downfall, completely unforced, and without even realizing it? We're zeroing in on Napoleon Bonaparte between the spring of 1807 and the summer of 1808. So how did Napoleon's absolute peak of power and unbridled optimism blind him into starting a completely unwinnable, devastating war? We usually picture Napoleon as this master calculator, right? A total genius of strategy who left literally nothing to chance. But there's this very distinct moment when that careful calculation was just hijacked by pure hubris.
Which brings us to Section 1, the zenith of power.
Let's set the scene. It's the spring of 1807, and Napoleon is riding high, just returning from signing the Treaty of Tilsit. He's nailed his biggest foreign policy goal, an alliance with Russia. With Tsar Alexander backing him up, he felt absolutely untouchable. You can actually see this physical manifestation of his optimism. He went and gutted the ruined palace of Fontainebleau, dropping over 3 million francs to renovate the whole place. He filled it with this bright red, gold, and white decor. He even had the Renaissance windows enlarged, just so the palace would gleam in the sun. It was the perfect stage for what he saw as his new age of progressive, absolute authoritarianism. And this intoxicating confidence, it wasn't just Napoleon feeling it, it trickled all the way down through his administration. Listen to this. French civil servant Jacques-Claude Bougnot recalled his time governing in Germany and literally equated himself to an ancient Roman proconsul. The French elite truly felt invincible. They thought they were walking a road that was wide open and strewn with flowers.
The crucial point here is that we're not just talking about standard political confidence. This was a profound sense of manifest destiny. The whole French imperial regime was basically intoxicated into believing they were a nation apart, absolutely meant to rule the continent. They honestly believed they could do no wrong. But, as you'll see, this unchecked optimism laid the groundwork for some massive miscalculations.
Moving on to Section 2, the economic war. To lock in this European hegemony, Napoleon became totally obsessed with choking out Great Britain economically. He wanted a pan-continental blockade. Now, look at how this escalated. In September 1807, the British launched this brutal, unprovoked attack on neutral Copenhagen, literally using rockets to destroy the Danish fleet so the French couldn't get it. Logically, that should show you the terrifying reach of British sea power. But Napoleon, completely blinded by his own hubris at this point, saw it differently. He looked at this maritime terror and thought, wow, they are desperate. He genuinely believed his economic stranglehold was succeeding and driving the British to panic. Feeling totally vindicated, he doubled down. By October 1807, he issued this incredibly draconian order demanding the absolute closure of ports across Europe, everywhere from Hamburg down to Spain and Etruria. This right here, this is the moment. This single, uncompromising order pushed his empire's resources way past the breaking point. By trying to enforce the impossible, he essentially signed the death warrant of his own empire, dragging himself into conflicts he just couldn't manage. Which sets us up for Section 3, the Iberian blind spot. Because of this desperate need to seal off the coasts, his gaze eventually landed on Portugal and Spain. Portugal was England's oldest ally and a massive loophole in his blockade, but to get to Portugal he had to go through Spain. And here is the truly crazy part. Napoleon meticulously understood Italy, Germany, and Poland from years of first-hand campaigning. But Spain? Spain was a total blind spot, complete terra incognita. He didn't understand the geography, and he certainly didn't understand the people. To make matters worse, he was relying on terrible advice from semi-disgraced diplomats who fed him completely distorted views of Spanish politics. So instead of grasping the reality on the ground, Napoleon fell into this very dangerous trap that historians call worshipping the map. When he sent General Junot's army to invade Portugal, he totally ignored the established roads. He literally just looked at a map, pointed to the Tagus River, and ordered them down that route simply because the line looked shorter. In reality, it was a rocky, unpeopled wilderness where his troops couldn't even live off the land. This kind of abstract, disconnected thinking was a huge red flag.
Now for Section 4, the Bayonne mousetrap.
Under the guise of this Portuguese invasion, Napoleon starts slipping French troops, over 100,000 of them, into an increasingly suspicious Spain. And by March 1808, the local political situation completely imploded with the Aranjuez riot. Here's how it went down. The Spanish public violently despised their king's chief minister, Godoy. A mob ransacks his palace. The terrified king, Carlos IV, immediately abdicates. His son, Ferdinand VII, is proclaimed king by enthusiastic crowds. And the French commander on the ground, Murat, instantly seizes on the chaos and marches 20,000 troops right into Madrid. It was the perfect, chaotic pretext for Napoleon to step in and play the peacemaker.
So Napoleon lures this incredibly dysfunctional royal family to his chateau in Bayonne, France, offering to arbitrate their dispute. But when he actually met them, he didn't see a political threat at all. He just saw a degenerate caricature of the old aristocracy. He saw King Carlos literally trying to hit his son with a cane. He saw Queen Maria Luisa shouting obscenities. And he actually described her as shriveled like a mummy. And he dismissed Ferdinand entirely, just calling him a sneak. He believed it was his destiny to sweep this whole embarrassing family away.
The juxtaposition of how these figures actually traveled to Bayonne is just wild. Ferdinand traveled in this creaking, Gothic royal coach, surrounded by massive, fiercely loyal Spanish crowds, literally begging him not to cross the border into France. Some even offered to disguise him so he could escape. But Napoleon? He completely ignored this undeniable reality on the ground, this immense public loyalty. Instead, he treated Ferdinand with the exact same contempt as the hated minister Godoy, who literally had to flee under the cover of darkness and change horses in open fields just to avoid being lynched by his own people.
And that brings us to Section 5, a fatal overreach.
Napoleon's absolute hubris totally blinded him to the fierce nationalistic loyalty of the Spanish public. He thought he was dealing with a mere map and a pathetic family. Once he had the royals caught in the mousetrap of Bayonne, convinced of his own infallibility, he just bullied both father and son into abdicating. He swiped the crown of Spain, handed it to his reluctant older brother Joseph, and treated a proud nation of over 10 million people like just another puzzle piece to slide around on his desk. He even confidently declared, "The Spanish government is weak. I will give it energy." He genuinely believed the Spanish people would welcome him with open arms for replacing a corrupt regime with modern reforms. But instead, this sheer, staggering arrogance ignited a brutal, unwinnable guerrilla war across the entire Iberian Peninsula. It was a terrain that was perfectly suited to insurgency, with a populace fiercely accustomed to fighting that way. He bled his empire dry for a country he literally never took the time to understand. Which brings us to the ultimate irony of this explainer. After 5 atrocious years of what became known as the Peninsular War, a war that drained his armies, shattered his aura of invincibility, and paved the way for his ultimate defeat, who was the man Napoleon finally had to restore to the Spanish throne in 1813? It was Ferdinand VII, the exact same man he had arrogantly dismissed as a sneak back in Bayonne. It's a really stark reminder of why this history matters right now. It proves that even the most brilliant, detail-oriented, strategic minds can architect their own catastrophic ruin when they become blinded by the intoxicating heights of their own success. When you stop looking at the reality on the ground and start worshiping the map, you might just chart a course straight off a cliff. So, what realities are our model leaders ignoring on their own maps today? Think about that. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the map.